Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to a home. Today I'm actually at a client's house. I'll show you how to install a faux board and batten look to take a room that's okay to amazing. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and take a second to subscribe to the channel. And if you're ready, let's go inside. The first step when creating a project like this is to take careful measurements of the area. I like to draw out the room. I'll take measurements of the trim work and the windows, and then I'll map out a careful plan. Since the goal here is to work with the existing trim work, the most important measurement for me is the depth of the board that I'll be using to create the battens. In this case, it was only 3/8, which did create some difficulty in choosing lumber. My original intention was just to go to a big box store and buy 1/4 inch thick poplar, but when I got there, they didn't have any. So I went back to the shop and milled up some poplar that I had put aside for some trim work of my own. I start this process at the miter saw, and because these boards were quite wide, I did have to rip them at the table saw before I was able to go to the jointer. At the jointer, I'll flatten one side and square up one edge, and then I can go to the planer to create a board that's S3S, or surfaced on 3 sides. From there I head back to the table saw, and I'll do a really small cut along the edge so that this board is S4S, and I can mill it up without having to worry about any rough sawn edges. The next step in the process is to rip a piece that's only 3/8 wide. Luckily I had a piece on hand that I had already fitted at the client's house that I knew would be flush with the existing trim work. I was able to use that as a spacer, and I set my table saw's fence, and then it was just all about ripping 65 pieces. There were a lot of small pieces needed for this project, so I spent a lot of time at the table saw just ripping these poplar boards down. And then every single piece needed to be sanded. I sanded one side with 120 and 180. But then I had to hand sand the edges. Since I knew the client was planning to paint, it's important to not have any sharp edges. Paint doesn't stick well to a sharp edge, so it was important to round over the front face. Finally, I had everything ready and I was headed back to the client's house. The client and I had discussed exactly what pattern we wanted to use. Now, typically I follow the guidelines in this trim work book. It's one of my favorites and has it has 1,001 ideas on how to do trim work. So typically for board and batten, I'll place the battens about 12 inches apart. But because of the windows and the irregular shape of the room, the client and I decided that we would put them every 12 inches where possible, but we also wanted to make sure that we followed a consistent pattern of placing the battens at the trim work of the doors and in a specific pattern around the windows. Now this room had existing trim work and caulk, and the caulk had to be removed before I could proceed. It's important to take frequent breaks when you're working. Everyone at this house made sure I had wonderful accommodations. I had time for coffee and brownies. Now, with the existing trim work, I knew that each of my battens was going to be a different height because the trim work wasn't exactly level. So I took each piece and marked where it was going to hit on the chair rail, and I was careful to number each one so that I could put them back where they belonged. And then I headed outside to my table saw, which I brought along for the ride. I love this DeWalt job site table saw. It's super portable and just rolls around, and I can easily get it in and out of my car. So I took my time and cut each piece to length using the marks that I had made and my mini crosscut sled. Again, 65 boards. So I really got my workout. Plus, it was like 12 degrees outside. Once I had a few pieces cut, I went inside to make sure that they had a nice tight fit. I like these battens to fit snugly without even having to be nailed. Now, normally I do like to glue these battens in place in addition to nailing, but the client didn't want that, so I just used these 1-inch 18 gauge brad nails. I only put a few nails in each of these. I knew that I was going to be using caulk and that the client was going to be painting this wall. So realistically, a lot of nails aren't needed. I did want to make sure that each nail was set a little below the surface before I used some paintable, stainable wood filler to cover them up. And then it's on to caulk. I find that caulking before painting really creates a nice edge and prevents any gaps. I like to use a little tiny bit at each seam just to create a better finished look. I take my time and head around the entire room. This particular caulk cleans up nicely with water, so if I feel like I overdo it, I can just take a wet paper towel or even a wet finger and wipe it off. I came back the next day just to do a little sanding for the nail holes, and I made sure to spend some time with the client's dog. Nothing like going to another person's house and meeting another wonderful shop dog. Well, my part of the job is finished. I think the spacing turned out great, and the client's plan to make this room just have a little extra accent is going to be amazing. And once the painting is done, you can really see how a small change can really elevate a space. Something as simple as adding a faux batten can take a good room to a great room. Thank you so much for following along in this process. I really enjoyed this project and being able to work with this client. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next time in the shop.